Archaeologists were deep inside a cave on a New Zealand mountain when their torchlight hit something on the floor that made every single one of them stop breathing. Sitting there in the middle of the cave was a massive claw. It still had flesh on it. It still had skin. It still had scales. And it looked like it had been cut off something alive no more than a few days ago. For a moment, every person in that cave had the exact same thought. Something was still alive in there. Something big. Something that had not been seen by human eyes in centuries. They were almost right. Almost. That claw was 3,300 years old, and the creature it came from was one of the most terrifying birds that ever walked the surface of this planet. That is just the first story we are telling today. Because the frozen earth has been giving up its dead at a pace that has scientists running out of words for what they are finding. A saber-toothed cat cub with its whiskers still perfect. A wolf head so fresh-looking they could not believe it was 32,000 years old. 2 cave-lion cubs from different ice ages lying next to the same river. A 42,000-year-old baby horse with actual liquid blood still inside its body. And the most terrifying development of all, a company that just spent $615 million bringing some of these things back. Stay with me. Let us start with that claw. Mount Owen is a mountain in New Zealand with a cave system that runs deep into the rock. When the archaeological team swept their lamps across the cave floor and found it, their first instinct was not scientific curiosity. Their first instinct was fear. The claw was large. It was intact. It was covered in dried flesh and the leathery scales of something that looked reptilian. It took several seconds for the team to process that they were not looking at a fresh kill. They were looking at something that had been lying on that cave floor for over 3,000 years in a state of almost perfect preservation. Cold, dry air inside the mountain had done what no laboratory could. It had stopped time. The claw belonged to an upland moa. And if you have never heard of the moa, then you have been missing one of the most extraordinary animals in the history of this planet. The upland moa was a bird, but calling it a bird the way you would call a sparrow, a bird is like calling a great white shark a fish. Technically accurate. Completely useless in capturing what you're dealing with. The largest subspecies of moa could stand over 10 feet tall. 10 feet! That is taller than most basketball hoops. It weighed more than 500 pounds. It had no wings whatsoever. Not vestigial wings, not small decorative wings. Nothing. It was a walking wall of feathers with legs like tree trunks and a head that could look a full-grown adult human directly in the eyes without having to adjust. And the upland variety, the one that left that claw in the cave, was one of the smaller subspecies. Scientists believe DNA from ancient moa remains like the Mount Owen claw could be the foundation for eventually resurrecting this species. And a Japanese geneticist named Anko Yasuyuki has already begun preliminary work toward that goal, talking about inserting moa DNA into chicken embryos. Whether that experiment produces a prehistoric giant or a very confused chicken is still to be determined. The moa had been thriving in New Zealand for 18 million years. 18 million years of evolutionary success, adapting into 10 distinct subspecies, filling every ecological niche from the coastal lowlands to the subalpine mountains. Then humans arrived. Polynesian sailors reached New Zealand around 1200 AD. They found a paradise. They also found enormous birds that had spent millions of years evolving with no significant human predators, which meant the moa had no instinct to flee, no strategy to evade, and no idea what a hunter with a weapon was. The result was one of the fastest megafaunal extinctions ever documented, faster than the dodo. The moa's only predator before humans was the Haast's eagle, the largest eagle that ever existed, with a wingspan that could reach 10 feet and talons the size of a tiger's claws. There are historical accounts from Maori oral tradition describing this eagle swooping into villages and taking human children. Full-sized children, not babies, not toddlers, children old enough to walk. By the time European explorers arrived in the 1760s, both the moa and the eagle that hunted it were already gone. The moa could not reproduce fast enough. The chicks took years to reach maturity. The hunters never stopped. The population collapsed. Now move north and east, move across continents in thousands of years, and enter Siberia, the greatest natural deep freeze on the surface of the Earth. Underneath the active soil layer of Siberia is the permafrost, a layer of permanently frozen sediment that in some places extends hundreds of meters down. Any animal that died in ancient Siberia and was buried quickly by a mudslide, an earthquake, a collapsing den, or a sudden flood went into this frozen archive and stayed there for thousands of years, for tens of thousands of years, in conditions so stable and so cold that skin does not rot, fur does not decay, organs do not liquefy, and whiskers do not fall out. In 2020, a team of mammoth tusk hunters working the banks of the Bayarika River in eastern Siberia found something that stopped the entire scientific world cold. They had been looking for ancient ivory, which is a significant economic activity in Siberia as the permafrost melts and the old tusk beds become exposed. They were not looking for what they found. Lying in the thawing earth was a mummified saber-toothed cat cub. Not bones, not a partial skeleton. A complete preserved cub with its fur intact, its claws intact, and its whiskers still perfectly attached to its face. 3 weeks old when it died. 36,000 years ago. A paleontologist named Manuel Salesa from Madrid, who was not even part of the research team, heard about this discovery and described it as one of the most exciting moments in his career. Let that sink in. A scientist who was not even there, who only heard the news secondhand, immediately called it a career highlight, because the scientific world had been waiting decades for exactly this moment. This animal was not the Smilodon, the famous dirt-toothed cat that most people picture when they hear saber-tooth. This was Homotherium latidens, the scimitar-toothed cat, a different but equally formidable predator. It was roughly the size of a modern African lion. Its upper canines were shorter than a Smilodon's, but serrated along the edges like a steak knife, designed for slashing rather than stabbing. Its front limbs were longer than its back limbs, giving it a sloping hyena-like silhouette. Skeletal analysis indicates it was built for speed and endurance rather than ambush. It could run fast and keep running. Analysis of its skull confirmed it had exceptional eyesight, calibrated for daytime hunting, and for reading the complex social behavior of prey animals that traveled in herds. This was not a creature that crept through darkness, hoping for a lucky strike. It was a pursuit predator that chased its targets across open ground in full daylight, and it was utterly dominant in its environment for thousands of years before climate change and the arrival of efficient human hunters closed the book on it. The DNA work on this cub is still ongoing, but researchers have confirmed a genomic sequence from the remains, and the detail of the preservation means they have tissue samples to work with. For an animal that was believed to be completely gone, this cub sitting in the Siberian riverbank for 36,000 years represents something remarkable. It is the first time this species has had a face, a real physical face with fur and whiskers and preserved muscle structure rather than just bones. Now here is a discovery that rewrote what we thought we knew about predator size in the prehistoric world: a severed head found on the banks of the Terek River in the Yakutia region of Siberia, the head of a wolf, but not a wolf anything like the ones alive today. This head measured 15.7 inches from snout to the back of the skull. A modern gray wolf skull measures around 9 inches. The head of a dire wolf, the animal that everyone was obsessed with because of Game of Thrones and the Ice Age, measured around 12 inches. This head was bigger than all of them. It belonged to a Pleistocene steppe wolf, an extinct species distinct from both modern wolves and dire wolves, and it was approximately 32,000 years old, found so well preserved that the fur was still on the face, the teeth were still in the jaw, and researchers were able to confirm the brain tissue was present inside the skull. A Russian team led by Albert Protopopov began building a complete 3D digital model of the skull interior, creating the first ever detailed reconstruction of a prehistoric steppe wolf brain. The scale of this animal matters for understanding what the Ice Age world actually looked like. When people imagine prehistoric predators, they think of the saber-toothed cats and the dire wolves. But the steppe wolf was bigger than the dire wolf. It was hunting across the frozen grasslands of ancient Siberia at the top of the food chain, and it went extinct only after modern, smaller wolves moved into its territory and outcompeted it for the dwindling prey available as the Ice Age ended. This was an apex predator, taken down not by a bigger predator, but by a more efficient one. One of the most important ecological lessons you can draw from a severed head in a frozen riverbank. The question of how the head was separated from the body has produced a genuine scientific argument. Researcher Dan Fisher from the University of Michigan believes the head was deliberately cut off by prehistoric humans, that this was a ritual or practical act by people who had killed or found the wolf and removed its most impressive part. Other researchers believe the body was partially buried, the head was exposed to scavengers, and the rest froze intact underground. The body may still be there, within a few meters of where the head was found, waiting for the right spring thaw. Nobody has found it yet. And then there are Sparta and Boris, 2 cave lion cubs discovered near the same river in Siberia, found within meters of each other at the same dig site. When they were first uncovered, the assumption was that they were siblings. What else could explain 2 perfectly preserved cave lion infants lying side by side in the earth? Then the dating came back. Sparta, a female cub, died 27,162 years ago. She was 2 months old. Boris died 43,448 years ago. He was also an infant. They were separated by 15,000 years, and yet they ended up in essentially the same spot. Geneticist Love Delane from Stockholm University said, "Sparta is the best preserved Ice Age specimen of any species ever found. Not the best cave lion, not the best cat, the best frozen Ice Age animal of any kind that has ever been recovered from the earth. Her whiskers are intact. Her eyelashes are intact. The tiny hairs inside her nostrils are intact. She looks like she fell asleep. The color of her fur has revealed something previously unknown about cave lion development. The cubs were born a different color than the adults, meaning they grew into their coloration as they matured, exactly like many modern cat species do. Nobody knew this before Sparta. A 27,000-year-old baby gave scientists information they could not get from any amount of adult bone analysis. CT scans of both cubs revealed severe skeletal trauma, dislocated ribs, skull damage, multiple fractures. No signs of predation. The injuries pattern points to sudden catastrophic burial, a den collapse, a mudslide, a flash flood. The fact that both animals were found along the same river, thousands of years apart, suggests this particular stretch of riverbank was prime cave lion territory for an immense span of time. Generation after generation of cave lions denned here, raised cubs here, and occasionally died here in the kinds of sudden geological events that the permafrost then preserved forever. Now the foal. This is the discovery that the entire scientific community agrees is the closest thing to a real-world Jurassic Park moment that has ever happened. A baby horse. A foal approximately 2 weeks old when it died, 42,000 years old, found in a crater in the Verkhoyansk region of Siberia. Bay-colored with a dark black tail, perfectly preserved down to the individual hairs. That alone would have made it one of the greatest Ice Age finds ever. But what the scientists found when they examined it took everything to another level entirely. They extracted liquid blood from inside the body, not dried blood residue, not a blood stain. Actual liquid blood, still red, still fluid, preserved by the extreme cold conditions for 42,000 years in a way that has no scientific precedent. This is only the second time liquid blood has ever been recovered from a prehistoric animal. The first was in 2013 when Russian scientists extracted blood from a woolly mammoth. And here is the honest truth that researchers themselves acknowledge. Neither that mammoth blood nor this foal blood can currently be used to clone these animals. The reason is that red blood cells do not have nuclei. They do not contain DNA. The liquid blood confirms extraordinary preservation, but viable DNA for cloning has to come from nucleated cells. Still, the tissue samples available from this foal represent an unprecedented opportunity for genomic research, and scientists at the Yakutia Mammoth Museum are pursuing every possible avenue. Which brings us to the most controversial and genuinely jaw-dropping development in the entire field of prehistoric animal science: Colossal Biosciences. This is a company based in Dallas, Texas, founded in 2021, that has now raised $615 million at a valuation of over $10 billion, making it one of the most heavily funded biotech companies in the world. And in April 2025, they announced something that broke the internet. They had produced 3 live dire wolf pups, animals with dire wolf genetics, bred from gray wolf embryos edited at 15 key points in the genome to match the ancient dire wolf DNA, extracted from a 13,000-year-old tooth and a 72,000-year-old skull. Those animals are alive right now, living on a private preserve somewhere in the western United States. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Scientists and the public pointed out that these are not real dire wolves. They are gray wolves with 15 genetic edits. Colossal's own chief scientist, Beth Shapiro, acknowledged this directly, saying that it is impossible to bring back an organism identical to a species that once lived, that what the company creates are functional approximations rather than true resurrections. The company has plans to pursue the woolly mammoth by 2028, using the same approach, editing Asian elephant cells to incorporate key mammoth traits, including the thick coat, the cold adaptation, and the characteristic body shape. The result will be, in the words of critics, a very hairy elephant, and that criticism is fair. But it misses something important. The genetic tools being developed to edit an elephant genome toward mammoth traits are the same tools that could one day be used to stabilize critically endangered species, to introduce lost genetic diversity into isolated populations, and to understand the deep biology of animals we can currently only study as bones. Colossal is also on the list for the moe and the dodo, 2 birds whose preserved remains, including specimens like the Mount Owen claw, could provide the foundation for reconstructing lost genomes. The moa's food supply in New Zealand has changed dramatically since its extinction. The plants it ate are themselves gone. Its habitat looks nothing like it did in 1200 AD. Bringing it back without solving those ecological questions would be producing an animal that has no world to live in, but the science is moving faster than the ethics, and that gap is getting wider every year. Here is the thing that ties all of these discoveries together. The permafrost is melting. Every single animal in this video was preserved because of conditions that are now changing. The same warming that is exposing these extraordinary specimens is also destroying the layer of frozen earth that has been holding them. Scientists estimate that as warming continues, a vast archive of Ice Age biology will be released from the permafrost before it can be studied. Ancient viruses, some of which could potentially be active, are already being found in thawing permafrost. In 2023, researchers revived a microscopic worm, a nematode belonging to a species never previously known to science, that had been frozen for 46,000 years. It woke up, it moved, it reproduced. An organism that had been frozen since Neanderthals walked the earth simply resumed its life. That experiment should be both fascinating and deeply sobering. The permafrost is not just a museum, it is a library, and it is burning. The race to extract, analyze, and understand what is melting out of the frozen earth before it decays is one of the most urgent scientific projects of the 21st century. Because these animals, the moa claw on a cave floor, the saber-toothed kitten with its whiskers still perfect, the wolf head bigger than anything alive today, the cave lion cubs who slept for 30 millennia, the baby horse with blood still in its veins, they are not just extraordinary curiosities. They are chapters in a story about what this planet was before we arrived. And every chapter that thaws and rots before anyone reads it is a chapter lost forever.